Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us with webinar 3 in the Strategic AI Readiness Series, Leading and Activating AI Adoption. In the previous sessions, we were focused more on building foundational understanding of AI, establishing internal structure, so things like key roles, principles, introducing policy. Today's session is a little bit more about operationalizing that structure. So we're going to focus on internal enablement, supporting the right role to guide adoption, equipping your teams with practical learning tools, ensuring communication is clear and consistent, and even just a little bit of a practical demo on how to use AI a bit better. This session is designed for those looking to take a more structured, intentional approach to AI readiness, particularly within small to medium-sized teams who do not have a dedicated change management resource. Everything we cover today is designed to be applied internally using the team and capacity you already have, with optional tools for deeper support if needed. You'll see in the chat we're posting some resources that you can use. You can open those right away and follow along, but I strongly recommend checking those out after the session as well. It's a great recap of what we covered today, and there's a lot of practical stuff in there that you can use in your day-to-day practice of getting AI started. My name is Andrew Rivet. I am a VCIO here at Smart Dolphins. I've been here for about 13 years, and these days I'm mostly talking to clients and their leaders about business IT strategy. And the number one topic lately is generative AI, as you can imagine. More than any other change in tech, we've had people coming to us and saying, hey, how do we actually adopt this? What's happening in this space? And we really want to help our clients and our community keep up with this trend because it is changing very rapidly. Lots of people joining still. Awesome. Before we dive in, I want to introduce Smart Dolphins a little bit for anyone who's not familiar with us. We are more than just an IT provider. We're a strategic technology partner for businesses. For 25 years, we've been helping organizations use technology to not only stay secure and operational, but to make the most of their technology within their industry. Our approach is proactive, people-focused, and tailored to align with business success. One way that we live this mission is through training events like this one. We believe that empowering people with knowledge is just as important or more important as having the right technology in place. One small note is that we do have the Q&A enabled for this session today, so if you have questions, please pop them in there. We will save some time at the end to address the larger ones, but I'll do my best to get to questions that are relevant to the topic we're talking about at that moment as well. So stick around for the end if you want to get some more practical questions in there. And so here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to start by talking about culture and not just policy, why that's critical to successful AI adoption. We'll look at how to define and support a role called the AI adoption lead, a practical internal role for guiding the use and learning. We'll talk about communicating AI expectations clearly, what's safe, what's encouraged, how to answer questions. We'll do an overview of our AI literacy starter kit, really awesome document that we have posted in the chat there, set of resources that you can use to support your team learning, and we'll touch on some lightweight change strategies, ways to guide adoption without needing a formal program, and then we'll close with how to embed your policy into day-to-day behavior, making it practical and visible. As we all know, you can send out a document with your policy in it. That doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to do what you've asked in that document. So throughout the session, you'll see those downloadable resources pop into the chat. We also have a little poll we're going to put out here, less than last time. We've had a few of those in previous sessions, and we're going to keep it light this time. So the real challenge of AI isn't tools, it's culture. And this is true of a lot of tools. While organizations are testing AI tools, there's often a significant gap between the experimentation and the structured adoption. According to recent, if you can call 2024 recent in terms of AI and how it's developing, but still pretty recent, 85% of IT leaders say they need to act on AI, but only 13% said they feel prepared to adopt safely. This disconnect isn't about tools or policy, it's about confidence, clarity, and communication, or in short, culture. When teams aren't sure what's okay or feel there's risk in experimenting, AI use either goes underground or doesn't take hold at all. I think that's something that's come up with a lot of my clients when I talk to them. They know the experimentation is happening, but it's kind of unstructured. It's all over the place. People are using the tools kind of haphazardly and not in a way that fits with company policy or culture. And so that's where we're going to focus on the practical side today, the roles, the messaging, learning supports, and helping people engage with AI safely and confidently. Any questions so far? I don't see anything yet, but feel free to pop it into the Q&A if you do have anything that comes up. either related to this or just something you think of that we could address at the end here. The session will be shorter than an hour, so there'll be lots of time to go through that in the end. Let's start with a poll asking, what is your biggest cultural blocker to AI use right now? Should see that pop up on your Teams screen. Let me find my view of the polls. There we go. Got a couple answers trickling in. So unclear guidance on what's allowed or expected. That's a popular one. And work is siloed, little cross-team sharing of AI learning. We've got some, unclear guidance is definitely taking the lead on this one. Now, see, that doesn't surprise me either, because what the conversations I've been having with clients have been is that they know that AI use is happening. Suddenly, someone is writing much better emails than they did 2 weeks ago, or that you're getting these documents that have some hints that, hey, this person's actually putting stuff into AI. And in most cases, that's fine, but then it makes you wonder what else is happening with that. And actually, in the end here, it looks like work is siloed. Little cross-team sharing of AI learnings is taking a lead now. And that's what we're hoping to address today. I'm going to talk about a role called the AI adoption lead in a moment, and that the idea is that that person will help connect all those teams together and really be a resource to share the teaching and the learning, kind of instilling a culture of AI adoption within your company, because that's what's really going to make the difference. So let's jump forward here. So in our last session, we talked about structure, specifically how to set policy, define your principles, establish 2 internal roles to make adoption manageable. That was the AI owner. Today, we're going to talk about the AI enablement or AI adoption lead. This is a more practical role that is going to guide communication, build the internal champions, and lightweight learning strategies. They're going to be responsible for communication. They're going to be responsible for connecting day-to-day use to the policy, and being a go-to for your team. Anyone who needs to talk about AI or has ideas or wondering whether something is allowed or not, that's the person who should be in that seat. Really someone who's going to champion and encourage safe AI use throughout your company. And so who should this be? The AI owner is the one defining the policy and direction. The adoption lead is going to help people engage with it day to day. It's a team level role. They don't need to be technical or have formal authority. What really matters is that they're visible, approachable, and can support that safe experimentation. They're not enforcing rules, they're not compliance, they're not IT. It's not a full-time job. Often the best fit for this role is going to be someone who's already curious about AI, probably using it quite a bit extensively, and we'll be able to bridge team questions and organizational direction. We'll show you how to support them effectively in the next couple of slides here. And really what you're looking for is someone who's easy to talk to, someone who can build excitement and guide that adoption, someone that they're probably a go-to for certain resources already, and someone who has an interest and actively wants to engage with AI. They see that value. And just going to quickly jump over and see if there's any questions yet. Is there a handout to accompany this presentation? Did we get that handout put into the chat? Maybe we got to repost it. If we could get that, that would be awesome. And let's keep moving here. So empowering the AI adoption lead, after you've identified that right person, you want to make sure that they're supported, not with budget or technology, but again, clarity, structure, and trust. We're recommending a 4-part support model. So first, a clear purpose. It could be as simple as a 1-sentence mission that you include in a kickoff email to everybody in the company saying, this is what this person's job is, this is what they're doing. Second, you want to have light structure. So a few predictable touch points that help make the role visible and consistent, whether that's weekly check-ins, shared questions, a known point of contact. We'd recommend like a Teams or a Slack channel that's dedicated to this use. People are sharing their wins, and the AI champion is the one sort of putting most of the content in there, or encouraging people or pointing out where they've seen that someone else has done well. You want really simple tools, and you'll find those in the handout here, some options that you have as far as messaging templates, a literacy kit. And then finally, it's leadership support. So even a public acknowledgement from managers to make that role credible and sustainable. And leadership in this context also means leading by example. If you are not the AI adoption lead, your use and communication about AI use is going to have a large impact on your organization. You know, you can make the channel but you should be participating in that, saying, hey, here's how I've used AI. Here's what we think we could use AI better, and really encouraging that throughout your company is going to make the biggest difference. And so in that guide, we have some resources, a quick start guide in the handout that provides a simple role description, a sample weekly rhythm, some suggested talking points, and a kickoff checklist. It's meant to be practical, adaptable, and easy to drop into your current structure. And as we move into messaging and literacy next, you can take a look at this because it'll serve as a starting point for empowering someone to lead adoption. But ultimately, what this all boils down to is making sure that your team understands this initiative and how it's being prioritized within your organization. Like we said, there is a lot of this experimentation happening naturally, and some people might even feel that like it's kind of this underground thing, they've got to hide it. You want to make sure that it's visible and that people are encouraged to be doing this so that it can be collaborative. You know, we talked about in the poll, there was a lot of answers that said that it's about the information being siloed and people aren't sort of sharing cross-team what they're doing with those tools, which is limiting the value. And so communication strategy matters because if people don't know what's allowed, what's expected, and what's risky, people are going to defer to either, again, going underground with it, or they're going to just not use it. They're going to be afraid they're going to break some rule. And so having clear communication lowers that fear, builds the confidence, and reinforces what your policy intends. The reality is that the adoption can often involve some initial slowdown as people build familiarity and find the use cases. Ensuring that people feel safe to take this path is really important. Otherwise, the uptake will be very slow or it won't happen. People are going to say, well, the policy says I can't do this with AI and I can't do that, so I don't really know what I can do. Constant communication is going to get people using the tool properly. So here's some examples of what that messaging might look like for different audiences. For your executive team, you want to make sure there's strategic clarity. We're talking about encouraging responsible AI exploration, there's structure, there's going to be people spending time learning how to use these tools and using that to make themselves faster. There's going to be some rockiness as we get started. Managers, operational expectations, here's what's encouraged, here's what to avoid and why, making sure that messaging is really consistent across all of your teams so that they're getting the same answers from each individual manager as you're rolling this out. And then individual staff, it's confidence and comfort. You want to make sure that people know that they're encouraged to try AI. They're allowed to make some mistakes. They're allowed to take the time to learn how to use these tools effectively because of the massive leverage that it's going to build in the future. And it's said that great leaders repeat themselves. So make sure you are repeating this message repetitively. That gets the message across. And so again, there's another resource in that handout. We call it the AI Communication Toolkit. There's a message planning worksheet, a couple of email templates for different audiences, an FAQ sheet for common questions, and a messaging cadence calendar. The intent here is to make the AI guidance clear, fast, and repeatable without overthinking it. You want to adapt these tools as needed to match your tone, structure, and culture, but the important thing is that you're putting that messaging out there and that you're doing it consistently and repetitively. The next thing you're going to find in there is the AI Literacy Starter Kit. And so once communication begins, the next step is helping the teams engage with AI meaningfully. And this doesn't necessarily mean formal training. It means access, confidence, and clarity. Things are changing very quickly here, so you've got to be learning how to learn and where to find these resources. And so this Literacy Starter Kit provides that starting point. It's a guided, low-lift way to introduce the generative AI concepts with safety guidelines. There's 5 curated articles and demos, safe use practice prompts, a red flags checklist, and weekly micro-learning plan designed to fit your existing team workflows. It also includes a team usage tracker that you can use to observe where learning is translating into practice. And it's really just intended to help you start small, build comfort, and create the kind of learning rhythm that supports sustainable AI use. And bringing it back to this messaging angle, I'm sure there's a lot of leaders in here, and the strongest message you can send is your own use of AI. So building your own literacy, exploring the use cases, sharing that openly with your team, that's going to have a huge impact on your culture and the speed of uptake within your company. If people aren't seeing this happen actively, especially from leadership within your company, it won't happen as quickly. And so take a look at those resources, some very good ones in there. And we're going to dive into a couple of specifics while we're here. And so a practical demonstration, not just theory. We do have a little lesson here on what we call prompt engineering. And to me, this is the fundamental skill. Understanding how these tools work will help you produce a great prompt and help the model produce your intended results more cleanly. Sometimes prompt engineering is even as simple as understanding yourself, what you're trying to accomplish, structuring your thinking in a way that gets the best output. So thinking of this in terms of how generative AI actually works, you're taking an average of all the training data that it has a huge variety of sources, and it's producing what feels like a good response or what it thinks is a good response to your input. Prompt engineering helps guide how that average draws from different sources to match your intention more directly. And so I'm going to talk about a few specific things you can do and things to consider when building a prompt, and then we'll bring it all together and walk through it in a practical way here. So the first thing, actually, let's jump back here for a second. So if you look at the prompting process, there's 5 steps here, and I'll give you a mnemonic at the end that actually covers this as well. But step 1 is being specific about your goal, what you're actually trying to get out of your communication with the LLM. You want to add a role and audience. These are really, really key for producing very specific output that you're looking for. Step 3 is you want to give it the structure or the format. And then you want to use tone or prior work examples. You can actually put in specific things you've used before, whether that's the template or whether that's just something that looks like what you want to use, and it will try and match that as best it can. And then you want to tell it how to think with as much detail as possible. And so step 1 here is seeing it from a different viewpoint or the role. So if you take the base prompt of list benefits of AI adoption, you'll get something very generic and very broad. But if you tell it to list the benefits of AI adoption as an experienced customer service manager, you're going to get something a little more targeted. It's going to talk more about the practical benefits of your customer service team using generative AI. If you talk about it from the perspective of a CFO, you're going to get something that talks about the legal aspects and something about how it affects stakeholders and efficiency and things like that. And the one tip I'd really like to send everyone away with is the benefit of saying something like, as an expert at X. It really impacts the kind of voice that the LLM uses when it's talking about a topic and the kinds of sources it's using to generate that information. By default, it's taking an average of everything that it has, but if you say you're an expert, it's going to use expert sources to generate the content that you're asking for. So next, from role, the voice you want it to use is you want to target the audience. Who is this for? Who are you talking to? Or who's the LLM talking to when it's generating this output? And so we'll dive into this specific example in just a minute here, but explain data privacy, again, is going to give you something very broad, very general, might be useful for learning about the topic, but it won't necessarily target it at a certain audience. And so if you think about that in the context of someone with no IT background, new employees, it's going to use very different language than if you say, I jumped forward a slide here. If you tell it to explain data privacy to the executive team, especially when you're trying to justify budget for compliance training, it's going to talk about how data privacy impacts these questions very differently. And even one sentence of audience context can really level up the output that you're getting from your LLM. The next one feels obvious and this happens kind of naturally, but it is important to point out, especially if you're using a single prompt to try and generate some output, is asking for a specific format. So consider the difference between saying, summarize this security policy, is going to make something up and you're going to get some kind of output. It's probably going to be quite lengthy if you're using ChatGPT as an example, but you can refine that a bit and say, summarize this policy in 3 short paragraphs, or summarize this policy into a table with 2 columns, policy requirement, why it matters. And you can layer these. So when you first ask for the output, you can say, actually make that shorter, give me something condensed. Or you can say, yeah, give me a table, or write this for a different audience and that sort of thing. You can work with it over time with the same initial prompt. And this one is probably the #1 tip that I've taken away. It's really improved the kind of output that I've been getting from my interactions with ChatGPT, but asking the AI for help. The LLM or the generative AI tool are really great at prompting. And so if you ask them to help you write your own prompt, you're going to get a much better output than if you didn't do that. And so the example I'm using here is to write a proposal for adopting AI in our organization. But then the last thing I'll write is, before you start writing, ask me any clarifying questions you can think of to better understand my goals, constraints, and audience. Or after you've asked it to put some output, you can say, are there any elements of this that I haven't thought of that can improve the quality of this product? Or is there something that I'm forgetting? And it will go back through it and give you some tips that you can use. And it is extremely effective. And so bringing a lot of this together, there are a couple of mnemonics that you can use to improve your prompting called RACE, or a more extended one called GRACED. And what RACE is role, audience, context, and examples, or really the format that you're looking for when you're putting something out. And if you want to expand it, being clear about your goal, and then the details that you're looking for, or details to describe what's different about your specific use case. And then the last thing I'll go through here in my demo is using Canvas to refine your output. So let me switch over. And because I didn't want to wait, I've actually gone through these. So we can just pretend these are being generated live. So that first example I gave you, explain data privacy. It's going to give you something sort of generic and broad. It's going to talk about principles very generally. It's going to talk about why it's important, but then use a bunch of different frameworks or legislation. And it's just going to be something to help you learn. And in fact, this is actually one of the best use cases I find for generative AI is learning, getting a surface level understanding of a topic very quickly. You can ask a few follow-up questions or dig into specifics there. And obviously you want to fact check the things that it tells you, but most of it will be pretty good. And you can get a sense of what the topic is about very, very quickly. But if we're looking for a specific output, the first thing we want to do is try out what happens when we give the generative AI a role. And so in this example, I've said, you are an expert on Canadian data privacy law, explain data privacy. So you get something a lot more specific. It's talking about PIPEDA, Privacy Act. It tells you actually there is some variation here between the different provinces, so you might want to worry about that. It gives you 10 principles specifically from PIPEDA, talks about updates of legislation, practical implications for organizations, and gives you a summary. But again, we're still pretty broad here. Again, this is good for a surface level understanding, but it's not necessarily the output that you're going to want to put into a poster or into an email to a client, that kind of thing. And then just as an example, I asked it to explain EU privacy law, and it does basically the same thing, but again, it's a little bit different. You know, the key principles are different in GDPR than in PIPEDA. And so that role really changes what it can do. And it's actually really good at contrasting. This isn't necessarily part of the example, but that's one of the great use cases is to compare different bits of information it's given you already. And so let's narrow that down a little bit further, and let's target a specific audience. I'm just checking, is there any questions so far? Feel free to stop me, or if you want me to try something here. Does this example from ChatGPT apply to Copilot? Copilot cannot consult the internet. Copilot, I believe, can, but I think by default that's disabled. But Copilot and ChatGPT are very, very similar in a lot of ways, but Copilot tends to have a little bit more guardrails on it. ChatGPT is a little more free and open in the way that it'll respond to your requests, but I can probably give you a better answer to that a bit later. So back to this, we've said you are a Canadian data privacy law expert, explain data privacy to an executive at a large company. And so it's focusing on the legal aspect. It broke down the core principles and actually cut them in half because executive audiences tend not to have a very large attention span in my experience. It talks about breach notification and penalties. Obviously, those are of a main concern to leaders within a company. It talks about emerging reforms and strategic implications like risks to the board, operational costs, competitive advantage. Obviously, that's very, very different than what we get when we say, we explain it in low-tech terms for a frontline employee at an SMB. There, you're going to get a lot more plain language. You're going to get an analogy about personal information like someone's wallet. You have to keep it safe, using only what you need from it. It's going to use a nice practical example of the golden rule, break down your specific responsibilities, and you're going to get something really targeted. But again, this is very general. And so excuse me. The next thing we want to do is give it a little more context. And in this example, I've layered in some detail that might not seem important, but you probably want to inject this, if you're producing a document like this. So you're an expert on Canadian data privacy law, we're writing something for a low-tech user at a small to medium business, and we are a property management company that handles residential apartment complexes and commercial properties. And again, it's saying I'm going to use plain language. And then it starts layering in specifics about this industry. So it's talking about tenants and vendors. It talks about an example where you don't need the tenant's SIN for renting an apartment. It talks about the real world risks for a company like yours, practical steps you can take, and then why it matters. Again, it's using both, this is a low-tech user, this is somebody who is like a new employee, and it's layering in your own specific industry concerns. And then the last thing, the E, example. And again, don't think of example necessarily as it needs to look exactly like this. It's more about the format. But you can take a document, even if it has nothing to do with your topic at all. If you take a PDF of another policy or another poster that you've drawn up for your company, you can actually attach that to your message and say, here's an example of what I want the document to look like. And it won't necessarily draw in the context of the information in the document, but it'll try and get it close to that format using the same types of headings and that sort of thing. But then in this one, I've said, it's all the same, but please format this as a one-page poster that we'll put up on the offices at each of our locations. And so you get something that's a little bit shorter. There's not as many long sentences. It's using some emojis to try and make it a bit more visually appealing. It's all bullet points, and it's structured in a way that someone can quickly skim and still get a sense of what they're worried about. And then the first thing it's going to do is say, hey, do you want a polished PDF poster? And I will say, as powerful as ChatGPT is, often the PDFs it produces are kind of messy. But what I would suggest instead is using the canvas feature. So if you haven't done this, it's as simple as saying, can you this on a canvas for us to refine? Then it's going to create this document here. And then let's make an adjustment here and say something like, can you simplify your responsibilities section? And then it's going to continue working on this specific document. Rather than regenerating it, it's something that you can work on in real time. And so it simplified the your responsibilities section there. And you can even do something like remove the questions or concerns. And you can even add additional things. So you could say something like, and can you expand on the introduction? Again, it's going to take this and it's going to make adjustments to it. And then you can download this copy as a PDF. And it actually tends to look a lot better than when you just ask it to generate a PDF by itself. And in fact, there's an issue here. So oops, it's the wrong button. Go back here and say, it doesn't quite fit on one page. And it actually doesn't care about typos as much as you'd think it does. And actually, a suggestion that used to be common was to say please to the model. I think OpenAI has said that you don't have to do that anymore. It actually used to have a tangible impact on the output. But nowadays, they've refined it so you don't have to ask nicely anymore. And see, it made some adjustments. Now it fits on a single page PDF. You can also download as a Word document or whatever. Pretty powerful, pretty simple. I love the Canvas tool. I think they've actually changed this recently because it used to be that you'd have sort of side-by-side view and it would work a little bit easier, but this is still a very, very powerful way to edit documents and to me, significantly better than asking it to produce PDFs directly. And so the last thing I want to show here is sort of a combination of things. It's both a more expanded use of the mnemonic and a good prompt. You can just write it as a sentence and make sure you're addressing the role, the audience, the context, and examples, or you can actually break it out. And if you ask ChatGPT to help you write a prompt for a custom GPT or something, it'll kind of format it like this. But I'll write out goal, role, audience, context, examples, and details in like a notepad document or something. And then I'll just start filling things in as I think of it. It's like, oh, you know what, actually, I want to refine it for this audience. And this is a piece of context. Here's a detail I want to add in there. And so this is one where I want to roll out a security awareness training program. The scenario is that we're a small business in manufacturing. Half our staff are not on computers most of the day. Even little details like this, where it's like we manufacture furniture, that can be helpful for producing something that's targeted, things you won't even think of. So there's no harm in adding even more and more information to a prompt like this. We experienced a cybersecurity breach. We're a fund company. Here's an example of what I want, again, a one-pager to highlight the importance of the program. And then in the details section, I've finished with please ask clarifying questions to produce the best document possible and identify gaps in what I've shared. Let's be clear about methodology before producing final materials. And what it's going to do is instead of jumping straight into a document, it's actually going to come back with a bunch of questions for you. So the first thing it does is says, this is what I'm actually going to do. I'm going to add a hook. I'm going to talk about why it matters, what's in it for me. Here's the tone I'm going to use. And this is an opportunity for you to provide feedback to the model about what you want this to look like or what kind of content you want it to have. And then it'll ask clarifying questions. And sometimes you'll be surprised by what it thinks of, things that you didn't consider. And so in this case, it's asking what kind of delivery method is the training going to have? Is there consequences for not complying with this new security awareness training program? What style should it be? What kind of voice do you want me to have? Whether it's playful but serious or professional with a warm tone. And what kind of action details are there? You don't actually have to answer these questions super directly. You can just kind of talk about the things that it's asking about. And the way that I tend to do this is by just numbering them the same. I'll say, here's your questions, here's my answers, this is the format. We have an internal escalation process, but we don't really need to spell out that you'll get in trouble if you don't do it in the document. I want something memo style that's repeatable. I want professional with warm tone, and mention the format, but don't discuss the rollout. The idea being that we could use this in multiple contexts, and then it says, here's what I'm going to do. And then it produces this one-pager document. And then, again, I would pop this onto a canvas, and then we would talk about refining the document further over time. And maybe I would even ask, give me a series of tweets or short messages I can use in Teams. You can kind of layer on other bits of information now that you've produced something specific to what you're looking for. And so again, I'd really reinforce this here, asking for help from the model about how to make what you're doing better. You can even ask it to write a prompt for you, refine that prompt, and then say, okay, respond to that prompt. It's a very powerful way to improve your output from ChatGPT. I'll just pause for a second here to see if there's any more questions that have come up in the meantime here. It doesn't look like it. Awesome. And again, we will have time at the end, so if there's something you want to work on together, you pop that in the Q&A and we'll spend some time working on that. Let me jump back over to the presentation here. And so the last thing I want to point out in the AI literacy document is that you do need to edit your AI outputs. Obviously, you can do that with the canvas, but at the end of the day, you're still accountable for what you put out into the world. Generative AI, even with the best prompt, can still miss the mark in terms of accuracy, relevance, tone, missing details, all that kind of thing. And so in this example we've written here, you've put the PDF of your company's sustainability program into the document. You've said, give me a summary of this. Don't just email that out. There is actually a checklist, an output review checklist in that handout that you can use to help you build your own practice. And again, like everything else here, you want to build this for yourself. You want to build a habit of checking the output in a structured way before a client comes back to you and says, hey, this is actually completely untrue, because then you'll build your habit in hindsight instead of proactively. And so in that literacy kit, there is also a 4-week rollout plan to help you make the most of this kit. It introduces a single light touch action every week. whether it's reading, experimenting with prompts, or sharing reflections. But the emphasis here isn't on a rigorous thing. You shouldn't do exactly what we say. I mean, you could, but the idea is that you have a rhythm. The best outcomes are going to come from curiosity-driven learning and consistency, and not necessarily from a top-down directive. And leaders participating, again, leading by example, by modeling the learning openly, your teams are more likely to follow. And so just make sure you have something in place with a light structure. Don't just announce the AI adoption lead in an email and then let it flounder and peter out over time. Change is really, really hard, even for something as exciting as this tool. And so change management without a change team. Now, you might be thinking, do we need a formal plan to manage our AI-related change? And in our experience, the answer is no. Again, you need that clarity, consistency, and a few visible behaviors. Using these 3 tactics, starting with a single team, just a pilot, find a team that makes the most sense to do it with, normalizing learning and sharing, a 10-minute AI moment, something along those lines, and then reinforcing through visibility, so sharing some of the gains that the team has got through making this initiative happen. That's going to be the real driver of change in an environment like this. And really, AI is changing so quickly and everything's so new that use cases are going to pop up in unexpected ways. You can introduce processes formally and say, we're doing this with AI now, but you're going to find a lot of value in safe, open experimentation. And so a lot of organizations are going to wait for a survey or dashboards to assess AI adoption, but really you want this to be happening through real-time signals, day-to-day conversations. And some of the things you're looking for are if people are sharing what they've learned, are managers asking better questions, or is there silence and confusion? Is the Teams channel you've set up have one post in it the day you launch the program and nothing since? You want to look for these early cues. You want to spot them and see them as opportunities to reinforce the good patterns or clarify where things aren't landing. People might interpret your policy as being very draconian and restrictive and not allowing them to experiment with these tools, when the reality is that you want people to do it just in a safe way. So I really would encourage you to think of this as like starting a campfire. You got to pay a lot of attention early. You got to look at the cues, what's working, what isn't. And it's a concerted effort to get it self-sustaining. But once it's burning, you don't need to pay so much attention to it. You just need to make sure that spark isn't going out early. And so we've included another tool in there we call the Change Tracker template. It's fairly simple, low touch. It's not meant to be super formal. It's more like a running log or a journal. And it's designed to help you with this process of capturing those early signals. You want to make sure you're looking for signs of disengagement or hesitation or misunderstanding, those opportunities to reinforce what's working and quickly address what isn't. It's especially important in that first month when you're introduced to policy or you're handing out learning content. You want to build something as a personal reminder for yourself, for your AI adoption lead to remain engaged and to keep working through this as you try to get that fire started. And so one thing I've heard a lot lately is that AI experimentation is happening regardless. People are doing it. Like I mentioned earlier, someone suddenly has a much better use of language in their emails, or they're a lot clearer or more concise. You know that they're using LLM, ChatGPT, or otherwise to help them out. And so we're writing policy to make sure that that's happening in a safe way. But there's a spectrum between sort of complete non-compliance, careless experimentation, private data being put into public models, and total paralysis, which is the fear of accidental non-compliance. But really, policies don't live in documents, they live in the behavior of your team. And so the best way to reinforce these principles is through everyday team practices, asking the reflective questions, sharing examples, recognizing safe, thoughtful use. And again, it doesn't have to be formal. A one-line comment in a Teams meeting, recognition post in Slack, all of these things can help reinforce what responsible AI use looks like, connect specifics to your policy, and give examples of where this is working for people. People are really good at misinterpreting words, even when the language is, to you, very clear and specific. And so the more visible, I jumped ahead, more visible and relatable that your policy becomes, the more likely it is to shape real behavior and reinforce the intent of the policy, which isn't to stop people from using these tools. And so that's about the content I have for you today. Just a summary of what we went through. We've talked about how to support the AI adoption lead with clarity and lightweight structure. We've outlined a messaging strategy to bring the policy to life. and a communication toolkit to help you get started. We shared a literacy starter kit that you can use with your teams immediately, some change management techniques that work without formal programs, and we've talked about how to make policy visible so that AI adoption becomes a part of how your teams work and not just a directive. Each of these resources is supported by the handout that we've got there and will help you move forward without needing a full transformation plan. So please be sure to grab a copy and review it, take the pieces you need, but most importantly, make sure you're building your own culture-centered journey around AI adoption. And so before we get into the Q&A section here, I just want to share our next webinar, which I think is coming up on this Tuesday. It's a little more specific, but it's scaling AI means that your organization has to be ready. That's not just a job for IT. We're going to talk about non-technical day-to-day practices that you can employ to protect sensitive information in an AI-enabled workplace, especially important when you're talking about things like the Copilot Pro program and connecting that to your SharePoint data and everything that it can access through that. We're going to talk about how to explore confidential content, label it appropriately, avoid accidental oversharing, and build a culture where everyone understands what their job is when it comes to, sharing or safeguarding data. It's not a technical training session. System configurations, DLP, and other enforcement measures can be addressed in private custom engagements. Instead, we're going to give you awareness and tools to guide the conversations and shape team habits in your organization. And so here's a little bit of information about how to contact us. I'll leave this up on the screen. And again, you can pop your questions into the Q&A or throw it into the chat there. Or if you're comfortable, I think you can unmute and just throw your question out there as well. I'm happy to chat about anything that you'd like regarding AI or the AI adoption lead, how you get this rolling out in your organization.